The story I'm about to tell you starts with a song. Not a hit single, not an anthem you've heard at every wedding reception since, but a rough little melody recorded in a cramped backstage room in a small southern city. A demo that was never meant for radio. A song that cuts off halfway through a chorus with a sound that, years later, will send a chill down the spine of anyone who hears it. Before we get into it, quick heads up. This is a fictional case, constructed like a real true crime investigation. Nobody in this story is a real person. But the patterns, the mistakes, the psychology, the way the town reacts, those all come straight out of how real cases actually unfold. And one more warning. We're talking about the murder of a young woman, and we're going to walk through the investigation around her death. I'll stay away from graphic details, but if you're not in the mood for something dark, it's totally okay to pause this and come back later. With that said, let me take you to a Thursday night in late May 2014, in a place called Riverbend, Tennessee. Riverbend is a fictional city, but if you've ever been to Nashville or Austin, you already know the vibe. Neon signs humming above narrow streets, old brick warehouses turned into bars, music leaking out of every doorway. There's a strip downtown where, on any given night, you can walk 2 blocks and hear country, rock, gospel, and a college kid with an acoustic guitar pouring his heart out to a crowd of 3. Our victim, our central figure, is 26-year-old singer-songwriter Cassidy Rhodes. If you've ever followed an up-and-coming musician on Instagram, you've seen someone like Cassidy. She's just on the edge of breaking through. Not a star yet, not a household name, but within the orbit of people who care about music, her name has started to pop up. A feature in a regional magazine, a song placed in the background of a cable drama, a tiny but loyal fanbase that knows every word. Cassidy grew up about an hour outside Riverbend in a town that has more cows than stoplights. Her mom taught 3rd grade, her dad fixed air conditioners. Church on Sundays, softball in the summer, choir practice on Wednesday nights. She started singing in that church choir, so young they had to prop her up on a milk crate so she could see the director. Her voice is one of those voices you don't expect from a person that small. Husky on the low notes, piercing but not shrill on the high ones. By the time she's 15, she's writing songs in spiral notebooks, scribbling lyrics in the margins of her algebra homework. At 17, she convinces her parents to let her play an open mic in Riverbend. At 18, she moves there for good, splitting rent in a crappy apartment with 2 other girls and working as a barista between gigs. Her songs are not bubblegum. They're catchy, yeah, but the subject matter hits harder than you'd expect. She writes about fathers who can't look their kids in the eye, about women who keep forgiving men who don't deserve it, about the feeling of seeing your hometown in the rearview mirror and not knowing if you'll ever come back. By 2014, she's got an EP out on a small independent label, a 4-piece band, and a manager/producer named Wayne Keller. Wayne is 45, stocky, balding, always in a black button-down and worn-out boots. He's one of those guys you'll find in every music town, never a star himself, but always hovering around the edges. He produced a couple of minor hits in the 90s, did some session work, then moved into managing acts. In Riverbend, Wayne is known as a hustler. He'll get you gigs. He'll get your demo in front of a label scout. He'll also take his cut, and more, if you're not looking closely at the contract. Cassidy signs with him at a point where she's just excited anyone believes in her. He gets her a better band, better studio time, better shows. He also becomes increasingly controlling over her sound, her image, how often she can play what he calls vanity gigs instead of paying ones. If you talk to people who were around them in those days, you hear 2 very different stories. Some say Wayne was the only reason Cassidy got as far as she did, that he shielded her from bad deals and shady people. Others say he was one of the shady people, that he kept her just dependent enough that she wouldn't notice how much he was taking out of every check. Then there's Noah Black. Noah is 27, lanky mop of dark hair, a songwriter who moved to Riverbend with a backpack and a notebook. He and Cassidy meet when they both play on the same open mic bill, and for a while they are that couple. You know the type, the ones harmonizing together at parties, sharing a mic on stage, tagging each other in sleepy 2 a.m. studio selfies. They write a handful of songs together that become fan favorites. One of them, Backroad Ghosts, gets picked up by a mid-level country artist, and suddenly there's real money on the table. Publishing rights, credits, percentages. The relationship between Cassidy and Noah burns hot and burns out. Depending on who you ask, the breakup is either mutual, 2 young creatives going in different directions, or an explosion of jealousy and accusations over songwriting theft and who really wrote what. At the same time, the band around Cassidy is solid but not drama-free. There's Jace Turner, 28, lead guitarist, talented to a degree that gets other guitarists stopping mid-drink to watch his solos. He and Cassidy have a kind of on-stage chemistry people ship in the comments, but they've both always said they're just friends. Jace, though, is quietly resentful of how much attention she gets compared to the rest of them, and he's not thrilled about the way Wayne sidelines him in meetings. On bass there's Tessa Lou, who seems to be the only adult in the room half the time, tuning her own instrument and everyone else's, keeping the set list organized, rolling her eyes at the drama. On drums, Marcus Reed, who just wants to play, get paid, and make it to his second job on time. Around all of this, like planets orbiting a small sun, are the fans. And one of them stands out. Micah Lane is 22, works at a car wash by day, lives online by night. He's the guy on the front row at almost every Cassidy Rhodes show within 100 miles. He runs a fan account that posts her set lists, live clips, grainy photos of her at the merch table. Depending on whether you're creeped out or charmed, you call him a loyal supporter or a borderline stalker. By spring 2014, everything seems to be converging on one night, the release show for Cassidy's first full-length album, Rust and Honey. The venue is the Lamplight, an old warehouse on the edge of Riverbend's music district. It's the kind of room with exposed ducts, sticky floors, and a stage that's seen every emotion a human being can feel. The Lamplight holds about 400 people when it's packed, and tonight it is more than packed. There's a line down the block. There are posters with Cassidy's face on the walls, with reviews from local blogs quoted in big fonts. A voice you don't forget. Lyrics that cut deeper than country radio usually allows. Backstage, 2 hours before showtime, it's controlled chaos. Cassidy is in a tiny green room the size of a walk-in closet, sitting on a beat-up couch, running through vocal warm-ups while a makeup artist dabs concealer under her eyes. She's nervous and wired in that way performers get. This isn't just another gig. There are label reps in the audience, a journalist from a bigger outlet, a rumor that someone from a major streaming platform is coming to scout. Wayne is pacing, phone glued to his ear, juggling texts about guest lists, drink comps, and last-minute technical issues. Jace is leaning against a wall, tuning and retuning his guitar, eyes narrowed, ear bent to the string. Tessa is labeling water bottles with Sharpie, making sure everyone has what they need. Marcus is hitting the practice pad with his sticks, tap tap tap, lost in his own rhythm. At one point, Noah appears. He's not on the guest list, and security almost doesn't let him through. But the Lamplight is not Madison Square Garden. The bouncers know him as that songwriter guy. He shows up with a small bouquet of supermarket flowers, says he just wants to wish her luck. Witnesses will later remember this moment very differently. Some will say Cassidy looked genuinely happy to see him, that they hugged, that she told him, "Hey, we made it, right?" Others will say her smile looked forced, that his presence in that tiny hallway sucked some of the air out of the room. Wayne definitely wasn't thrilled. One tech remembers Wayne stepping between them, telling Noah, "You had your chance, man. Tonight is not about you." Noah stays anyway, at least for the beginning of the show. He finds a spot near the soundboard, hands shoved into his pockets, watching. Micah, the superfan, is already plastered to the barricade at the front of the stage. He's wearing a t-shirt he had custom printed with Cassidy's lyrics, holding a handmade sign that says "Play Backroad Ghosts." 3 exclamation marks. At around 9:15 p.m., the lights go down. The crowd roars. Cassidy and the band walk on stage. If you listen to the live recording from that night, and there is a recording, because of course there is, because this is a music town, the first half of the set sounds like a victory lap. The band is tight. Her voice is on. She tells a funny story between songs about writing one of the tracks in the laundry room of her apartment building. She makes her parents cry when she dedicates a ballad to the 2 people who let their kid do something this crazy. Somewhere around 10:30, she plays Backroad Ghosts, the old collaboration with Noah. People in the crowd turn, almost automatically, to see his reaction. Some swear they saw him wipe his eyes. Others say he looked angry. Human memory is not a surveillance camera. It edits, it dramatizes, it fills gaps with whatever narrative feels right. What we know for sure is that at around 11 p.m., after a sweaty, emotional 90-minute set, Cassidy thanks the crowd, says goodnight, and walks off stage. The band follows. The house lights come up halfway, signaling we're probably done, but the crowd starts chanting, "One more song! One more song!" The lamplight staff looks at each other. The sound engineer checks his watch. They have a hard curfew at midnight. Wayne leans into Cassidy's ear in the wings and, according to Jace, says, "If you want a label deal, you go back out. Give them the new one. Because there is a new song." Cassidy has been teasing it for weeks in interviews and on social media. "A song I wrote that I'm not sure anyone's ready for." She hasn't put it on the album. It's not even fully produced. She's been workshopping it alone, late at night, just her and an acoustic guitar and a little handheld recorder. She tells the crowd, Okay, one more, but this one's not finished yet, so you're my guinea pigs." The crowd goes wild. Phones come out like a field of glowworms as everyone tries to capture this moment. The band starts to move back toward their instruments, but Cassidy waves them off. "Just me," she says. "Let's see how it feels naked." She walks back on stage alone, guitar strap over her shoulder, hair damp with sweat, eyeliner smudged just enough to look like a choice. She starts playing a slow, minor key progression, something darker and more jagged than her earlier stuff. The lyrics, from the clips that survived, are about being watched, about someone who loves you loud in a room full of people but follows you quiet when the lights all go down. People in the room that night will later talk about this song like it was a premonition. Human beings love stories that feel prophetic. We'll come back to that. Cassidy plays about 3 minutes. She fumbles one verse, laughs, says, "We'll fix that in post," and then ends it abruptly. "Okay, that's all you get for now," she tells them. "Wait for the deluxe edition." At 11:10 p.m., she walks off stage for the last time. What happens in the next 45 minutes is the heart of this mystery. Wayne tells police later that she went straight to the tiny writing room just off the hallway behind the stage. The lamplight is an old building, and that room is more of a converted storage closet than a real dressing room. No windows, egg crate foam on the walls, a lamp, a couch, a small table with a fake plant, and decades of band stickers on the door. Cassidy liked that room. She called it the bunker. Before shows, she'd sit in there to warm up. After shows, she'd sometimes duck in to decompress, to record a memo on her handheld Zoom recorder while the feelings were still fresh. At 11:13 p.m., according to a timestamp on the device, that recorder turns on. The first 2 minutes of audio sound exactly like you'd expect. The soft clunk of a case closing, the rustle of cloth, the thump of a guitar being leaned against the couch. Cassidy humming through snatches of the new song, half talking to herself. "Okay," she says on the tape, "that bridge is trash, Rhodes, we gotta fix that." You can hear the dull thud of bass and drums from the next band's soundcheck filtering through the walls. Somebody walks past in the hallway and laughs. The sound is muffled, like a neighbor's TV through an apartment wall. At about 11:16, there's a knock on the door. 3 knocks. Not loud, not frantic. Just there. The recorder picks it up. Cassidy stops humming. There's a pause. Then a chair creaks as she stands up. Her footsteps across the floor. We don't hear the door open. That's outside the mix sweet spot, but we hear her voice, slightly off mic. "Hey, I thought you'd already left." We hear a male voice answer. Low. Calm. Also slightly off mic. You can't make out the words on the raw tape. It just sounds like a rumble. When the police listen to this audio for the first time the next day, all they hear is that rumble. They don't have the software, or the budget, to peel apart the frequencies and isolate the voice the way labs can now. On the tape, Cassidy laughs, but it's a different laugh than the one she used on stage. On stage she laughed with her whole chest. Here it's short, tight. "Yeah, I know," she says. "We'll talk about it Monday, okay?" She doesn't sound thrilled. She doesn't sound terrified either. If you didn't know what was about to happen, you'd think it was just an awkward backstage conversation. The two of them talk for about 5 minutes. Cass's voice rises and falls, but you can only catch every third word over the ambient noise. The words contract, credits, and not fair seem to show up more than once. At one point the man's voice gets sharper. One line everyone agrees on, even on the unenhanced tape, is when he says very clearly, "You don't walk away from me like this." And then, the key line from Cassidy. "I'm not your song, Wayne. I'm mine. Remember that." At around 11:22 p.m., something hits the table with a hard clack. Maybe a glass, maybe her phone. Then there's a scrape, like something being dragged or someone's shoe sliding on the floor. The recorder picks up a sudden burst of static, a muffled thud, and then nothing that sounds like words. There's movement, but it's chaotic. The low thump of bass from the stage masks the frequencies where you'd hear anything like a scream. The last distinct sound on the tape is something metal hitting the floor. A stand maybe. A mic. And then the recorder keeps running for another 10 minutes, capturing nothing but the hum of the room and far-off crowd noise. At 11:28 p.m., according to security footage in the hallway, Wayne is seen coming out of the backstage area, walking briskly toward the front bar. He's on his phone. He bumps into a sound tech and puts a hand on the guy's shoulder to steady him. On the video, he looks annoyed but not panicked. At 11:30, Noah is seen leaving the lamplight, pushing through the crowd toward the street. He later says he felt weird watching her sing a song they wrote together, that he didn't want to be that guy hanging around after the show. A couple of fans recognize him, ask for selfies. There are time-stamped photos on social media to prove it. At 11:34, Jace is filmed smoking a cigarette in the alley with Marcus. They're talking about how tight the second verse of one song felt. Jace ducks back inside at 11:38, according to the same camera. He says he went to grab his pedal board. At 11:46, Tessa, the bassist, goes to look for Cassidy. She wants to do a quick toast with the band before they start breaking down gear. She knocks on the writing room door. No answer. She tries the handle. It's not locked. When she pushes the door open, the first thing she notices is the guitar on the floor, one of the tuning pegs bent where it hit something on the way down. Then she sees Cassidy. The details of her injuries are in the autopsy report, but we don't need to dwell on them. The medical examiner will later say she died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being hit hard with a heavy, narrow object. There are no defensive wounds on her arms, which suggests the first blow came from behind or from very close range. There are no overt signs of sexual assault. Her phone is under the couch, cracked. The Zoom recorder is on the table, still running. Tessa screams. People come running. Someone hits 911. Within 15 minutes, Riverbend PD officers are on the scene. They clear the backstage area, usher shell-shocked band members and staff into the main room, and start treating the little writing room as a crime scene. It's a nightmare environment for investigators. The club is packed. People have been drinking, sweating, touching everything. The backstage hallway has had a parade of band members, techs, friends, and random hangers-on through it all night. Any clean footprint, any stray hair, any single partial fingerprint could belong to half the county. Still, they do what they can. They photograph everything: the overturned stool, the bent tuning peg, a small smear of blood on the edge of the table. They bag the recorder. They mark the position of her body. They take swabs, collect cups and bottles, and try to lock down a timeline. By sunrise, a name is already forming on everyone's lips. Noah. It's almost a reflex. In crime after crime involving intimate partner violence, it's the ex-detectives know this. Prosecutors know this. The public definitely knows this. Our brains like patterns, and the bitter ex-boyfriend snapped is an easy one to grab. Here's what the cops have in their first 48 hours. Cassidy is dead, and the last people known to have seen her alive are all men with, at minimum, complicated relationships with her. Her ex, Noah, showed up uninvited. They had a messy history involving money and song credits. He was in the building for most of the night. He left before she was found, and he wrote some very dark songs in the months after her death. Her manager, Wayne, was known to be controlling about contracts, was in charge of every backstage access list, and admits he spoke to her alone after the show. He says they argued about her wanting to cancel a run of small club dates to pursue a label deal. Her guitarist, Jace, had creative frustrations, potentially financial ones, and a lot of pent-up jealousy about whose name was on the marquee. The superfan, Micah, posted online about how nobody understands her music like I do. He was seen lurking near backstage earlier in the night, trying to get a setlist signed. That's 4 men, all with motives you could easily spin up into a true crime episode of their own. Investigators do what they always do. They start interviewing. When they sit Noah down, he's pale, shaking, and visibly stunned. He says all the right grief words. We were kids. She didn't deserve this. I would never hurt her. But cops are trained not to take grief at face value. They also know a few things he doesn't know they know yet. They know his text messages show he and Cassidy fought as recently as 2 weeks before the show about a new cut of Backroad Ghosts, where his name appears only in the fine print. They know he told a friend in a text, "If she cuts me out like this, I swear I'll lose it." They know there's security footage of him slipping into the backstage hallway for about 3 minutes around 10:50 p.m., before the encore. He explains that last part by saying he wanted to drop the flowers by the door and avoid making it awkward by hanging around. He says a staff member told him where the green room door was, but when he got there, he lost his nerve, left the flowers on a folding chair, and went back out into the crowd. That story is plausible. But the image of him in that hallway becomes a seed in the detectives' minds, and seeds like that tend to grow. When they interview Wayne, his demeanor is very different. He's angry, pacing, snapping at questions he doesn't like. He keeps pivoting the conversation back to money. The money they'd invested in this album, the money they'll lose on canceled tour dates, the money Cassidy's catalog might now be worth. It's not a good look. But not a good look is not a crime. Wayne admits he went to the writing room after the show, just like the audio suggests. He says he and Cassidy argued for a few minutes about her wanting to meet with a big label A&R guy without him. He insists he left after that, around 11:20, to find the promoter and talk about settling up the night's take. He says he doesn't know who went into the room after him. He says he never touched her, never put a hand on her in anger. He says the line on the tape, "You don't walk away from me like this," has been taken out of context. When they sit down with Jace, he seems genuinely shattered. He cries. He talks about how he always thought they'd make it out together, that she'd promised to bring him along if she got a major label deal. He also, somewhat unhelpfully for himself, admits he was angry with her about publishing credits, and that he'd almost quit the band twice. He feels like Wayne manipulates her, he says, but he never thought it would come to this. Tessa's interview is the most straightforward. She says she didn't leave the main stage area between the end of the show and the moment she went looking for Cassidy. There are enough audience cell phone videos and selfies floating around that this seems to be true. Micah, the superfan, says he tried to get backstage but was turned away by security. He posts, hours after the murder, a gut-wrenching message on the fan account. "I can't believe she's gone. I was right there. I would have done anything to protect her." Depending on your level of trust, that reads either as heartbreak or as performance. Pretty quickly, the investigation orbits two main suspects, the ex and the manager. They pull phone records, dig into financials, collect DNA samples. They send the recorder to a state lab, hoping some audio genius there can clean up the voices. They try to map the timeline down to the minute. One detail that keeps rising to the surface is that line on the tape. "I'm not your song, Wayne. I'm mine." It sounds like a defiant goodbye. It sounds like the prelude to a break. It fits cleanly into the narrative of an older man who's built a career on controlling young women's careers, losing his meal ticket, and snapping. It also fits a less dramatic narrative where a manager is frustrated his artist is making a risky move and trying to talk her out of it, then leaves. Confirmation bias kicks in hard. People who already don't trust the music industry hear that line and go, "Yup, there it is." People who already assume the ex is guilty latch on to Noah's darker texts instead, and discount the Wayne angle because of little things. Maybe they met him at a show once and he seemed nice, or they liked the bands he discovered. The district attorney's office looks at the evidence and sees a mess. On one hand, you have a recording that strongly suggests Wayne and Cassidy were alone together minutes before she died. You have a documented financial motive. If she leaves him for a major label, his income drops, possibly to zero. You have people who can testify to his temper. On the other hand, you have no blood on his clothes, no bruises on his hands, no eyewitnesses to any physical altercation. His timeline after leaving the room is fuzzy, but so is everyone's. The one camera that would have shown the writing room door directly was broken. The club didn't have the kind of coverage you'd expect in a casino or on a casino-themed TV show. They had a handful of cheap cameras and a lot of dark corners. With Noah, you've got angry texts, a documented argument over song credits, and the cultural narrative of the ex did it hovering over everything. But also a pretty solid timeline of him out in the crowd, selfies with timestamps, people who swear they saw him leave before 11:30. The superfan's DNA isn't in the room. The guitarist's fingerprints are on everything because he's part of the band, so they mean nothing. The bass player is clean. The promoter is frantic but cooperative. The bartender remembers Wayne yelling about drink tickets, not skulking around with a mic stand. The cleaned-up audio from the lab is underwhelming. They managed to separate the rumble just enough to confirm what everyone already suspected. The male voice is Wayne's, not Noah's. But they still can't make out what's being said apart from those two lines. There's no "I'm gonna kill you," no screaming, no clear sound of a weapon being picked up. After a year of chasing leads, the case stalls. No one is arrested. No one is formally cleared. The file becomes one of those thick manila folders that gets moved from one detective's desk to another as assignments change. Outside the courthouse, though, the trial never really ended. In the court of public opinion, people pick their villain and dig in. Some fans, especially those who followed every step of Cassidy's early career, decide it has to be Wayne. They trade stories in comment sections and forums about how he creeped them out the one time they met him, or about the way he talked over Cassidy in interviews. They point to statistics about how many women in entertainment are harmed by men who control their careers. They write think pieces about exploitation in the music industry. Others, especially those who identify more with Noah, see him as a scapegoat. They talk about how easily a grieving ex can be turned into a suspect because his pain looks messy, because he says the wrong thing in the wrong interview, because he writes a song 6 months later called Silence in the Green Room, and people read it as confession instead of catharsis. Then there are the conspiracy theorists who insist it must have been a stranger who slipped in off the street, or Micah, finally snapping when he realized she'd never be his, or Jace, furious about a solo being cut from the album. The people at the center of it, the band, the families, don't have the luxury of treating it like a puzzle on a Reddit thread. They live with the uncertainty every day. Years pass. Riverbend's music scene moves on to the next wave of hopefuls. The Lamplight changes ownership, gets a fresh coat of paint, installs better cameras. Cassidy's album Rust and Honey becomes one of those cult favorites people discover in thrift stores and swear they found something magical. The royalties trickle in. The question of who killed her trickles along with them. Then in 2021, the case gets pulled back into the light. Part of it is the true crime boom. A popular podcast does a season on Riverbend's unsolved cases, and Cassidy's story is front and center. Part of it is technological. Forensic audio analysis has made some big leaps in 7 years. And part of it is one detective who just cannot let it go. Detective Laura Gaines joined the department in 2019, too late to work the original case. But she's a music fan. She remembers going to Lamplight shows in college, and she remembers the night she opened up an old file and saw a familiar album cover clipped to the inside with a paperclip. Laura is methodical. Where earlier investigators had been overwhelmed by the chaos of the club environment, she sees patterns. Where they had written off the audio as too muddy, she sees a chance. She sends the original raw recorder file, not the already processed version, to a private forensic audio lab that specializes in things like separating voices in crowded rooms, pulling human speech out from under explosions and gunfire. It's expensive, but the department manages to get a grant. What the lab does would have sounded like science fiction in the 90s. They run the tape through algorithms that identify frequency patterns associated with different speakers. They build a model of Cassidy's voice from other recordings and essentially tell the software, subtract anything that sounds like her from the mix. Now subtract the house music frequencies. What's left? It's not perfect. It's artifact-y and weird in places. But it's better. For the first time, you can hear snippets of what Wayne is actually saying in that room. Around 11:18 p.m., when Cassidy says, "We'll talk about it Monday, okay?" you can now hear Wayne say, "You won't have a Monday if you do this, Cass." Does he mean that literally? Is it a threat? Is it hyperbole like "you're dead to me"? Context matters, and you don't have all of it. Still, hearing that line is like getting a little jolt in the spine. Later, when he says, "You don't walk away from me like this," you can hear another line right after. "They'll drop you when they find out what you really are." What does that mean? Is he talking about her being difficult? About mental health issues? About something else? Again, context you don't have. Most damning, though, is a sound that nobody recognized as important before. A musical sound. At about 11 hours, 20 minutes and 30 seconds on the tape, right before the first loud thud, there's a short, 4-note motif. High-pitched, electronic, almost like the chime at the start of a commercial. The lab isolates it and tags it as a non-human tonal audio event. Laura, who's the kind of detective who will stay up until 2 a.m. reading case files with half an eye on old show reruns, is also the kind of person who hears that and goes, "Wait, I've heard that before." She digs through videos, interviews, anything she can find. In a behind-the-scenes web clip from 2013, there's footage of Wayne in the studio, pulling his phone out during a session. The camera mics pick up a sound, a notification tone. 4 descending notes. The exact same sound. It's a custom text tone, he brags in the video. He set it up using the intro of one of his favorite old records. He's very proud of it. Everyone in that room in 2013 probably forgot that moment the minute they scrolled past it. But it's frozen on the internet. And now that same sound, Wayne's custom text tone, is on the tape, inside the room where Cassidy was killed, right before everything went sideways. On one level, that's not shocking. He admitted he was in the room. Of course his phone might have gone off. But pay attention to what that sound does to the timeline. The text tone comes after the heated lines about contracts and walking away. It comes at a moment when, based on the conversation flow, it sounds like he's on his way out. You hear a chair scrape, footsteps, like someone heading toward the door. Then the tone. Then his voice more agitated. "Do not walk away from me, Cassidy, we are not done." He doesn't walk away. He stays. 30 seconds later, there's the thud. Laura takes this, the enhanced transcript, the new audio, and all the old evidence back to the DA. On paper, the case now looks stronger against Wayne than ever. You've got him alone in a small room with a woman, who ends up dead minutes later. You've got a clear motive in terms of money and control. You've got him making what sound like threats, captured on tape. You've got corroborating statements from other artists about his temper. You've got the musical fingerprint, the text tone, that places him there at the crucial moment when he could have left but chose not to. You've also got an ex-boyfriend who, thanks to the audio, is now more clearly not the man in that room. You've got cell tower data and social media timestamps that put him steadily farther from the lamplight as the critical half-hour passes. You've got other suspects with weaker motives and less opportunity. If this were a TV drama, this is where the arrest happens. Cuffs. Press conference. A careful speech about justice delayed, not necessarily being justice denied. Except there's one problem. Wayne Keller is dead. He died in 2018 of a heart attack in his sleep, in a rental house outside of town. No suspicious circumstances. No signs of a struggle. Just a middle-aged man whose heart gave out a few decades too soon. You can't arrest a dead man. You can't put him on trial. You can't cross-examine him about what he meant by those lines on the tape, or what he did in the seconds after that text tone, or whether he picked up that heavy mic stand in anger or in fear. What the DA can do, what they eventually decide to do, is hold a press conference announcing that Cassidy's case is being closed by exception, with Wayne named as the primary suspect based on the totality of the evidence. It's a weird kind of justice. Officially, the file gets moved from the open stack to the closed stack. Unofficially, a lot of people feel unfulfilled. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Even with the new audio, there is still a sliver of doubt. Could someone else have entered the room after Wayne left? Sure. The recorder keeps rolling for 10 minutes. Just because his text tone is on there doesn't mean he was physically present at the exact moment of the fatal blow. Maybe he stormed out, got that angry text in the hallway, and never went back in. Maybe the thud was something dropping, not a weapon being swung. Maybe Cassidy slipped, hit her head, and the scene only looked like an assault. The medical examiner says the angle and force of the wound make a simple fall unlikely, but unlikely is not impossible. Juries are built on words like reasonable doubt. We listening at home are built on something else, narrative common sense. Most people, when they put all the pieces in a row, the text tone, the confrontation, the financial motive, the control, the pattern of behavior, come to the same conclusion Detective Laura did. That Wayne lost control in that room. That he grabbed whatever was at hand. That he never meant to kill her, or maybe he did, and in the aftermath he wiped what he could, stepped into the hallway, and blended back into the chaos. But not everyone is satisfied with that ending. Noah, for one, has spent 7 years living under a cloud he didn't create. Even with the new announcement, there are people who will always side-eye him because our brains like simple stories, and the X did it, is one of the simplest there is. Every time he releases a new song, someone in the comments brings up Cassidy. Every time he plays a small venue, there's at least one person in the back whispering, "Isn't that the guy from that case?" Jace never really recovers musically. He bounces between bands. He drinks too much. He turns down interviews about that night, saying he's done talking about it. When pressed, he'll say he always suspected Wayne, but convinced himself it was safer not to know. Micah, the fan, turns his account into a kind of digital memorial for Cassidy. Every year on the anniversary of the album release, he posts the set list from that night, the grainy clips of that unfinished song, the last chord hanging in the air. He believes Wayne did it. He also believes it never should have taken that long to see the signs. Tessa is the one who keeps in touch with Detective Laura. She's the one who testifies at that press conference in front of a small crowd about how Cassidy wanted out of certain contracts, about how the line, "I'm not your song, I'm mine," wasn't just a metaphor. It was a legal reality she was trying to claim. And you listening to this are left with your own questions. What if, in those early days, the investigators had been less anchored to the usual scripts, the jealous ex, the obsessed fan, and more open to the story the music itself was telling? What if they'd had the tools in 2014 that they had in 2021, the ability to pull a text tone out of the noise and say, right there, that's the moment that matters? What if Cassidy had never recorded that little demo at all? Without that tape, all the arguments in that room would have vanished into the walls, absorbed like so many other backstage fights. There'd be no lines to parse, no hint of what he said, no digital ghost of Wayne's phone chiming at the worst possible second. It's eerie, isn't it, that in a story about a musician, the key witness ends up being sound? Not a neighbor looking out of a window, not a security guard, not a camera, but 4 descending notes from a notification tone and a short, sharp sentence spoken in anger. You don't walk away from me like this. Of course, even sound lies, or at least misleads. We hear what we expect to hear. We fill in garbled syllables with whatever fits our preferred suspect. We replay that tape in our minds and imagine the tone of voice, the posture, the distance between them. We're not just listening, we're projecting. In the end, what we know is this. Cassidy Rhodes walked onto a stage in Riverbend, Tennessee, one warm night in 2014, and sang her heart out. She walked off to a tiny soundproof room to capture the bones of a song about being watched, being followed, being claimed. She argued with a man who had power over her career. A few minutes later, she was lying on that warped wooden floor, and the recorder on the table became the only unblinking witness. Years later, thanks to algorithms, persistence, and a detective who couldn't stop hearing that 4-note chime in her head, we can tell a much clearer story about what likely happened. Likely. Not certainly. Justice, if you can call naming a dead man justice, came late and in a form that doesn't fit neatly into a courtroom drama. There's no verdict, no sentencing. Just a line in a press release and a quiet tick of a case file moving to a different drawer. But Cassidy's songs are still out there. People still find Rust and Honey on old playlists and in used CD bins and on streaming algorithm rabbit holes. They still hum along to choruses she wrote in laundry rooms and parking lots. They still post lyrics in their stories when they're going through a breakup or a bad week. And that unfinished song, the one she played alone on stage, the one she was trying to wrestle into shape in that little room, exists only in fragments. In fan videos with shaky audio. In that recorder, where the bridge cuts off and the world collapses into noise. In the memories of the people who were there that night, who say they can still hear the way she sang the line about hands that clap for you in public, but close too tight in the dark. So I'll leave you with this. If you were on a jury, but instead of crime scene photos and expert witnesses, you only had what we've talked about tonight. The timeline, the relationships, the text tone, the voices on the tape. How comfortable would you feel saying beyond a reasonable doubt that Wayne Keller killed her? Would you need more? A fingerprint on the mic stand? An eyewitness? A confession? Or does the combination of music and motive and moment feel like enough? Drop your theory in the comments. Tell me who you think was in that room, what you think happened between the last chord and the fatal blow, and whether you think the music itself, those recordings, those sounds, did more to help or to hurt this investigation. Because in this case, the thing Cassidy loved most, the thing that brought her to Riverbend in the first place, music, ended up being both the reason a man wanted to control her and the reason we can still, years later, hear the echo of what he did. And that might be the eeriest part of all, that her last witness was a song that never got to be finished.